Welcome back to another class on Evean Hazaer Halacha series. We are in Siman Aleph in Halacha Yud in the Pitchi Teshuva in Ot Tet Vav. This will be part 12I of the Shi'ur. In the previous class, we saw that the Chacham Tzvi had a difficulty from our Siman in Halacha Yud to Siman Kuf Nun Tet in Halacha Hey in the Ramah. He didn't understand how could it be by the case of the Arusa, we allowed the Arus to go ahead and get married to another woman, but by the case of the Zikah in Siman Kuf Nun Tet, we don't allow the brother to go ahead and get married unless he does Chalitza. The reason why the Chacham Tzvi had this question to even begin with is because the Chacham Tzvi wanted to learn this Ramah over here. When the Ramah says, Im einu rotzeh liknos ela liftor, he wanted to learn that this whole institution of Chaim Rabbeinu Gershom is speaking about not allowing one to go ahead and get married to another woman while he has a wife. So came the Chacham Tzvi and he said, 1 second. When the Shulchan Aruch says, V'chein ba'arusa, and so too by the Arusa, the Chaim of Rabbeinu Gershom is not applicable. Came the Ramah said, Im einu rotzeh liknos, that's only if he does not want to marry her, but rather he wants to divorce her. So we see from over here that if he wants to divorce her, he is allowed to go ahead and get married to another woman and then divorce his Arusa. But came the Chacham Tzvi and said, I don't understand. In Evean Hazaer in Siman Kuf Nun Tet in Halacha Hey, towards the end of the Ramah, which we did in the previous class, the Ramah says by the case of the Zikah, over there we're going to tell the brother he cannot go ahead and get married to another woman unless he does first Chalitza with the Yivama. So comes the Chacham Tzvi and he says, I don't understand. If I'm going to learn this situation over here, that the Chaim Rabbeinu Gershom is going on not having another wife, so it comes out over here that these two statements, these two halachot, Halacha Yud in Siman Aleph and Halacha Hey in Siman Kuf Nun Tet, are contradictory, because it doesn't make sense. If the Chaim of Rabbeinu Gershom is applicable, so therefore, and you allow him to go ahead and get married in the case of the Arusa, so why did you ask her by the case of the Zikah? Or if you're going to tell me that by the case of the Zikah it's not allowed, so it should not have been allowed by the case of the Arusa. They're contradictory opinions. So the Ramah is contradicting himself. So this is what was bothering the Chacham Tzvi. To make this more clear, we're going to go over some points we saw in the previous class. We have to understand, when Rabbeinu Gershom made a cherem, there were two types of cherem that Rabbeinu Gershom made. The first one is, Shelo lisa isha acheret al ishto. One is not allowed to marry another woman on top of his original wife. This is the way the Ramah wants to learn the Shulchan Aruch, and this is the way the Chacham Tzvi understands the Ramah. That's why he's having a problem. Because if in Siman Aleph, let's just do this. If in Siman Aleph, in Halacha Yud, the Chaim of Rabbeinu Gershom is the first one, where you're not allowed to marry another woman on top of your wife. And we're going to tell you, as long as he wants to divorce the Arusa, he's allowed to go ahead and get married to another wife, because he's going to eventually divorce her. But then he says, I have a problem, because why? Later on, in Siman Kuf Nun Tet in Halacha Hey, in the Ramah over there clearly says that by the case of the Zikah, the guy is not allowed to go ahead and get married unless he does Chalitza with the Yivama. So it comes out that Siman Aleph and Halacha Yud contradicts Siman Kuf Nun Tet Halacha Hey in the Ramah. The Ramah in two different Simanim contradict one another. So this is what we're going to actually try to answer today, Be'ezrat Hashem. So let's do this one more time. Up to now we've been learning that the Chaim of Rabbeinu Gershom, there are two types of Chaim of Rabbeinu Gershom. The first one is Shelo lisa isha acheret al ishto. One is not allowed to marry another woman on top of his wife. That is the first cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom. The second cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom is Shelo legaresh ishto ba'al korcha. One is not allowed to divorce his wife against her will. Now, I just want to point this out. Whenever I'm going to tell you the first cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom, I want you to know automatically it's going on this case. Whenever I say the second cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom, I want you to understand that it's going on this. So one more time. The first cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom is speaking about where one is not allowed to take another woman on top of his original wife. The second case of Rabbeinu Gershom is speaking about one is not allowed to divorce his wife against her will. Let's see this, Rabotai, because you'll see how this plays a very big role when I'm going to say the cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom, the first case, understand is this. Second case, understand is this. Came the Chacham Tzvi, and the Chacham Tzvi says, I don't understand. How could the Zikah, which is the Rabbanan, be better than the case of the Arusa, which is from the Torah? Like I explained over here. In Siman Aleph, you tell me that the Arus is allowed to go ahead and get married to another woman since he's going to divorce his Arusa. But in Siman Kuf Nun Tet in Halacha Hey in the Ramah, you're telling me that the Yavam, he's not allowed to go ahead and get married to another woman unless he does Chalitza with the Yivama. Doesn't make sense. Comes out over here that the opinions are contradicting each other in the Pesach of the Ramah itself. By Zikah, we don't allow the guy to get remarried. But by the Arusa case, we do. That is the question. This is what the Chacham Tzvi is bothered by. He says, doesn't make sense. If there is a cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom, then also by the case of the Arusa, he should not have been allowed to get married. Now, in this case, we're going to actually go ahead and see the answer. The Sefer Beit Meir, which we saw in the Pitchit Shur in the previous classes, the Sefer Beit Meir said, Nir'ah lo yoter pirush of Beit Hillel. He liked more the explanation of Beit Hillel, the way he wanted to explain the case of the Shulchan Aruch. When the Shulchan Aruch said, Be'arusa lo tiken, right? We saw in the Shulchan Aruch, when it says with there, V'chen be'arusa, and so too by the Arusa, the cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom is not applicable. The Shulchan Aruch never told you, was it the first cherem? Or was it the second cherem? Was it the first cherem on marrying another woman? Or was it the second cherem where it speaks about not divorcing your wife against her will? The Shulchan Aruch never said anything. All the Shulchan Aruch said, V'chen ba'arusa. And so too by the Arusa, the cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom is not applicable. Which cherem? Cherem number 1 or cherem number 2? So let's see this one more time. The Sefer Beit Meir said, Nir'ah lo yoter pirush of Beit Hillel. The Sefer Beit Meir said he likes the explanation more of the understanding of Beit Hillel, how he wanted to learn the Ramah in the Shulchan Aruch. Lefaresh be'arusa lo tiken. Do you know what the Shulchan Aruch was saying? Basically, what Beit Hillel did, we also saw this in the Pitchit Shuvah. What Beit Hillel did, he went and he took the Ramah. When the Ramah says, "Im rotzeh liknos elo liftor," came to Beit Hillel and he says, "Do you know what the Ramah was telling you? He's telling you that even though we know that the second case of cherem Rabbeinu Gershom, where you're not allowed to divorce your wife against your will, in this situation, I'm going to allow you to go ahead and divorce her against her will." Rabotai, watch this one more time. Whenever the Beit Hillel wanted to learn the Pshat in the Ramah to explain the Shulchan Aruch, so when the Shulchan Aruch said, Be'arusa lo tiken, do you know what that means in the Arusa? He did not institute the cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom. You know what that means? Dahainu, which means to say, Lo tiken legaresh et ishto ba'al korcha. He did not institute to divorce his wife against her will. Meaning to say you are allowed to go ahead and divorce your wife against her will. How did we see this? Because we saw in the Pitchit Shuvah clearly said, when it says the Barusa lo tiken, Hainu ma shetiken shelo legaresh ba'al korcho, Which means to say that this second cherem Rabbeinu Gershom, where you're not allowed to divorce your wife against her will, and this is what the Rama added by saying, if you don't want to marry, but rather you want to divorce her. Do you know what it means? And you want to divorce her? That means to say, that you are able to go and get, and you are able to go and divorce her against her will. But to tell me that he's allowed to go ahead and get married to another woman prior to divorcing the first one, the Arusa, that the Rama never spoke about, and that is Asur. Now, so we see over here clearly, according to Beit Hillel, when the Shulchan Aruch says V'chem ba'arusa, the cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom is not applicable. You know which cherem is not applicable? The cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom is not applicable. Case number 2. Where Rabbeinu Gershom said, you're not allowed to divorce your wife against her will, comes the Shulchan Aruch and he tells you, by the case of the Arusa, the cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom, of that cherem, of divorcing your wife against her will, was never applicable in such a situation. And that is exactly what the Rama is saying. If you don't want to marry her, but rather divorce her, you know what it means to divorce her? Divorce her against her will. That's all the Rama did. All the Rama did was come and tell us that when the Shulchan Aruch says V'chem ba'arusa lo tiken, by the Arusa, that the cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom is not applicable. You know which cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom is not applicable? Cherem number 2 is not applicable. So now you have to understand, if I'm speaking about in this Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Aleph, in Halacha Yud, if we are speaking in Siman Aleph, in Halacha Yud, that is the cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom, number 2, where you're not allowed to divorce your wife against her will, and over here we're going to allow you to do it. That's what it means. He did not institute this cherem. Now, Chacham Tzvi does not have a question from Siman Aleph Halacha Yud to Siman Kuf Nun Tet Halacha Hey in the Rama. Why? Because over there you're right. Over there you're not allowed to marry. And so by the case of the Arusa, you're not going to be able to get married. What the Chacham Tzvi wanted to learn, that this, in Siman Aleph, it was speaking about cherem number 1. So if you speak about cherem number 1, how did the Rama say later on, he's not allowed to get married? And over here in Halacha Aleph, he's saying you're allowed to get married. They're contradictory opinions, doesn't make sense. Comes the Sefer Beit Meir and he says, no, look at the opinion of Beit Hillel. If you insert the opinion of Beit Hillel, the Chacham Tzvi doesn't, the question of Chacham Tzvi does not stand. Why? Because what did Chacham Tzvi say? No, what did the Sefer Beit Meir say in the opinion of Beit Hillel? Do you know what Siman Aleph Halacha Yud, do you know what kind of cherem they're speaking about? It's speaking about cherem number 2. So now, if they're speaking about cherem number 2, but cherem number 1 they never spoke about, because by the case of the Arusa, he's also not allowed to get married. So good, now it makes sense with Siman Kuf Nun Tet and Halacha Hey. Just like you're not allowed to get married over here, you're not allowed to get married over there. So that's why, Rabotai, the question of Chacham Tzvi is settled once you insert the opinion of Beit Hillel. So let's just see this over here. So one more time. When it says, Ba'arusa lo tiken, by the Arusa, the institution of Rabbeinu Gershom was not instituted. Do you know which cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom was not instituted? Cherem number 2. Dahainu lo tiken ligaresh et ishto ba'al kurcha. That's what the Rama was telling us. In the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch, that the cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom to divorce one's wife against her will, it was not instituted by the Arusa, and you are allowed to go ahead and divorce her in such a situation when she's in the Arusa. The cherem number 2 of Rabbeinu Gershom is not applicable because she's not your wife. She's only in Arusa. She's not a full-fledged wife. And now we don't have a difficulty what the Chacham Tzvi had asked. What did he say? How can Zikah be better than the Arusa? Because we know regarding Zikah is Dirabanan, and regarding the Arusa is Doraita. If over here you're going to tell me right now that the case in Siman Aleph and Halacha Yud is speak about Cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom number 1, then we're going to tell you, I have a problem with the zikah, because if this is the Rabbanan and he's not allowed to go ahead and get married, how did you allow me to go get married over here? They contradict your opinions. So that's what we're going to say, Shnei ofanim shonim. There are two different cases. You can't compare zikah with the case of the Arusa and Siman Aleph and Halacha Yud. Why? Because Ligabe zikah, when we're dealing with Siman Kuf Nun Tet and Halacha Hey in the Ramah, in the case of the zikah, you know what kind of cherem over there is? Cherem number 1. So over here, if it would have been a real case of the Arusa, where the Arus wanted to go ahead and get married, even though he wants to go ahead and get divorced later, we're not going to allow him to go ahead and get married. So now Siman Kuf Nun Tet and Siman Aleph, they go hand in hand. So by the case of the zikah, he's not allowed to get married unless he first does chalitza. By the case of the Arusa, so too the Arus is not going to be able to get married unless he first divorces his Arusa. So now they are equal. So what was the case of the Arusa and Siman Aleph in Halacha Yud? Ligabi Arusa, we're going to tell you is cherem number 2. Don't mix them up. They're not identical cases. They're not identical cases. Rabotai, now that we see that, let me just read for you, literally 3 lines. After all this, you'll appreciate the Pitchit Teshuva. Comes at Pitchit Teshuva and he says, Ubezeh murvachlan. And with this we gain the lo kasha kushet hacham tzvi. Siman kuftet zayin. It's no longer a difficulty what the Chacham Tzvi asked in Siman kuftet zayin. Mehachal is Siman kuf nun tet sivhei behaga'ah. From here, from Siman Aleph in Halacha Yud to Siman kuf nun tet and sivhei in the Haga'ah. The amai tiya adifa zikah the Rabbanan me'arusa de oraita. Why should the case of the zikah be better, which is it's only from the rabbis? Why should that case be better in a sense of not allowing the guy to go ahead and get married to another woman than the case of the arusa, which is the oraita, where we allow him to go ahead and get married? He says it doesn't make sense. The Ramah is contradicting himself heran. But comes the Pitchit Teshuva said, Ubezeh murvachlan. But if you're going to go ahead and you're going to apply the answer of Beit Hillel, that we're not speaking about over here the case of the Arusa with cherem number 1, but rather by the case of the Arusa we're speaking about cherem number 2. If by the case of the Arusa it's cherem number 2, now you can't ask any questions from Siman Aleph to Siman Kuf Nun Tet. Why is that? Because in Siman Aleph, even the Ramah would have told you, if we're dealing with the case of the Arus, where he wants to divorce the Arusa, and now he wants to go ahead and get married, we're not going to allow him to get married until he first gives her the divorce papers. Then only can he go ahead and get married. And so too in Siman Kuf Nun Tet, if the Yavam wants to go ahead and now he wants to go ahead and get married, he's not allowed to marry until he first gives the Yivama, the Chalitza, until she takes off his shoes and she spits inside. In both of these cases we see clearly that the men are not allowed to go and get married unless they first release the original woman. But in our case, when it says V'chein ba'arusa, and so too by the Arusa, when the Shulchan Aruch said, do you know what he meant? That the cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom is not applicable? The cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom is not applicable. Which cherem? Cherem number 2. How do we see it? Because that's what the Ramah said. Im ein rotzeh liknos ela liftor. If you don't want to marry, but rather you want to divorce her, you know what means rather you want to divorce her? You can divorce her against her will. And comes the Ramah and he explains to you the Shulchan Aruch. So when the Shulchan Aruch says V'chein ba'arusa lo tiken cherem Rabbeinu Gershom, which cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom was not instituted? Cherem number 2. If this is cherem number 2, you have no questions on Siman Kuf Nun Tet. Okay, Rabotai, with this we do conclude this whole back and forth with Chacham Tzvi, but we understand over here a very important concept, that if Chacham Tzvi wanted to apply over here the cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom number 1, then you're right, Siman Aleph, Halacha Yud, and Siman Kuf Nun Tet and Halacha Hey, It comes out that the opinions are contradicting one another. Because how can you tell me over here that the cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom is not applicable? You allow him to go ahead and get married. And by the case of the Zikah, you don't allow him to get married. I don't understand. Why should that be better than this case? If over here it's mutar, over there it should also be mutar. So came the Beit Meir and he said, no. Insert the opinion of Beit Hillel. Beit Hillel goes on to explain, we're not speaking about over here of cherem number 1. We're speaking about over here of cherem number 2. Once you say that this is cherem number 2, then we're going to tell you that in Siman, Kuf Nun Tet, and the case of the Arus, if he wants to go ahead and get married before divorcing his wife, he's not allowed to. Because of cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom of number 1 is still applicable. And so too in Siman Kuf Nun Tet, that's what the Ramah said over there. The cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom is applicable even by a Yavam. He's not allowed to go ahead and get married until he first does the Chalitza. So now they're identical, there are no contradictions. But in our case over here, we're speaking about cherem number 2, so don't ask any questions from Siman Aleph, Halacha Yud, to Siman Kuf Nun Tet, in Halacha Hey, in the Ramah. Rabotai, have a great day. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.